Well, good morning, everybody. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and especially to talk about such an important topic, SMEs, a topic that gets everybody excited usually. However, I think there is one problem, which is that when we talk about SMEs, in reality, I'm not sure we know what we're talking about. Because SMEs are a very, very diverse group. And as you can see on the slide, some illustrations, I think SMEs are a big group where we put many very different types of companies. And all these companies actually also have very different needs, very different stakeholders, and also very different objectives. So I sometimes wonder how we can sort it out in this space, what are the different needs, and how the CMU can be successful if it's just talking about SMEs. And I was very pleased to hear Nicolas being very clear on what the concern is regarding SMEs in the context of a CMU. It is about high potential growth SMEs. It is the ones that have the potential to go on public markets. It is the ones that will create growth and jobs, the legitimate current obsession that I think we all have. Now, however, it's quite funny that when you speak about high potential SMEs, very often people think about Google, which, by the way, is a pretty sizable company today. And it seems that size is the thing that we all think about. And especially when you look at the current accounting directive as we have it, it's all about size. The way we look at, the way we try to differentiate between SMEs depends on a number of thresholds: turnover, assets, staff. And that's all we look about in terms of the accounting directive. Of course, size is important, it matters, but it's not the only thing, actually. And especially if you are in the context of a CMU and you're concerned about these high potential SMEs, what really matters, I think, is not size. It is what they want to do, the activities that they have, the degree of complexity of these activities, their business model, the degree of complexity of their transactions, when they have transactions, by the way. Some in the early days don't even have transactions. The kind of stakeholders that they have, the range of these stakeholders. Are they just the family, friends who have put money into the pond? Or are we talking about global investors? That makes a little bit of a difference. And of course, the markets on which they are active. Do they have the ambition to stay on local markets, or do they want to go cross-border? And again, I think one of the key differentiators that we have to think about, and Nicolas mentioned it actually, it's whether this SME wants to go public or not. And that's the question that Hamlet could have been asking to Lord Hill. Should I go public to be public or not to be public? That's really at the heart of the question. Why? Well, because if you go public, automatically you have public accountability. You must be concerned about investors' protection. And that's where I think it is good, actually, that the Commission considers in the field of accounting working together with the ISB, and maybe not necessarily using IFRS for SMEs, as I think one of the key issues here is that IFRS for SMEs have been developed for non-public companies, for companies that are private, that don't call on external investors. So I think it is a much better way forward, probably, to work together, and I think I insist on the together with the ISB to find an appropriate solution. And insisting on the together, I think there is a big piece of work, perhaps, for the Commission to make sure that it is together, including in the Parliament, for instance, and that it is not against. I think this should be really a joint project. So, when you look also at what is driving value creation in these high potential startups, well, I think we've moved a long way from the old brick and mortar model. And what is actually really creating value in these companies are these drivers: the business model and the funding of the company, the management talent, but also the the talent of the management. So I think you can read it in both directions. That's really one of the key elements that venture capitalists will look for in a high potential startup. The corporate governance model will have a very important impact. Of course, IP and intangibles and the competitive edge of the company, basically the idea on which it will be based, and also the way it manages risk, and especially the concerns that it may have for environmental and social issues, which are key to developing a long-term sustainable business model. So the unfortunate reality is that today's accounting framework doesn't really look at these drivers and still struggles actually measuring a number of them. And that's why at FE we actually just finalized a project on the future of corporate reporting. And we voluntarily call it corporate reporting, not financial reporting, because I think today long-term investors, but also those who believe in these high-potential startups, will look for more often than only financial information. So that's why we're talking about corporate reporting. This report actually has been mostly focused, I think, on not SMEs actually necessarily, but companies that are public and that have multinational ambitions. However, I think there are a number of learning points, outcomes of the report that I believe are also very valid for SMEs. Well, the first one, I think, is leveraging technology. There was an interesting, actually, report from the FRC, the English regulator, recently, that actually was outlining the fact that SMEs investors do value the annual report. That especially for SMEs, the annual report is a very important piece of information. And that this report should get more attention also from the preparers, because it is really one of the key pieces of information that investor can use to make investment decisions. And I think if you look at my previous picture, on the left side you see what annual reports may look like today. Several hundred pages of paper. And very often, this is not the most user-friendly way of communicating information. So I think one of the beauty of technology is that it actually also reduces a number of costs. And this should help SMEs making their information more accessible and also more usable by users. It's not only about communicating, it's also about the way you're thinking about the kind of information you're providing. And there is an interesting, I think, cycle that is created by information technology, actually, is that you have the possibility to put out there more and more relevant information. I think that's really the key criteria. But you also create more appetite. And people do now look for more information and also quite diverse information. So I think we do have to look at how this information can be provided in a clearer way, in a more concise way, and therefore think maybe in terms of a different approach to reporting based on different layers. But it is essential that we have shorter, clearer, more concise annual reports with perhaps, thanks to technology, the possibility to dig into the details if people want to dig into the details. That's one of the key ideas that actually is behind this report. We also had, I think, a number of conclusions that can serve as recommendations for policymakers. So food for thought, maybe, Nicolas, on this. And I think there is a clear need to first start by reducing the obstacles. Things can't happen if we put obstacles on the way everywhere. And that's where, again, I think working hand in hand with the ISB will be helpful, because right now I don't think, sorry to disappoint you, Nicolas, but I don't think that the accounting directive is doing the trick. Using the traditional threshold size-based approach, now creating micro, small, medium and large companies with all the thresholds effects that you can think of when you have to go from one category to the other. But it's also having more than 100 options, I think, right now, which actually are 100 of instances where the member states couldn't agree, even on so basic things as, substance of a forum. The basic principles, the fundamental principles that the Commission very rightly wanted to have in the directive, and that the Member States in the Council, with the help of the Parliament, actually torn apart. So I think it is clear that the way we go in Europe about legislating on accounting is not necessarily doing the trick. And I think it was a very good decision to outsource the production, so to say, of financial reporting standards to a third party. And I see in this equation the IASB as a trusted third party who can maybe have a little bit of distance with the infights that the member states like to have on matters such as accounting. If we want high potential startups to go on markets and on global markets or cross-border in the EU, well, it's obvious that we need to have more consistency. Coming back to the accounting directive, we all say that we would favor a bottom-up approach, focusing first on the needs of the smaller companies and then building up the requirements for the larger ones. And however, we keep on doing just the opposite, starting from the large companies and then screaming down, I would say, the requirements to try to make them fit for purpose for small companies. So we do have to change the philosophy on which we go about these things. More principles, well, I mentioned the very welcome effort of the European Commission to have fundamental principles in the directive, but we can't even at member state level stick to the fundamental principles. And I think more proportionality is probably the most important thing. There is a lot of work going on right now. I'm sure Leo will speak about this in more details, but we believe that IFRS will be the best solution if it is applied in a proportional manner, so that there is a continuum in the reporting requirements that are asked from companies, and that companies do not find obstacle on their way to growth if they have to change framework along the road. So it is very important to have this consistency and a proportional application all along the route to growth in accounting requirements. Now, if we want things to change, I think that's one of the key points that we make in our report. It is critically important that we allow, I would even say that we tolerate experimentation. There will be no innovation in the space, in any space actually, but I think the space of financial reporting is just like any other. There will be no experimentation, there will be no innovation, if we don't have experimentation. And we should really allow this to keep things growing. I'll stop here. Thank you very much. And I'm sure Leo will put more flesh on the